Okay.
All right. Welcome everybody to History Club. Second meeting.
Hey!
First door open with a Gatorade.
Nice.
Push down, push.
Hey, come here.
Very
You
nice.
both got nice. I got. I don't know. I just feel like. You should get.
Huh?
We're just both dressed up.
We're very dressed up today.
Oh, very
Hey, YouTube.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm subbed to the channel.
Nice.
Yeah.
If you want some quiche, here you go. Quiche.
Offer quiche to YouTube.
Yes.
Everything to YouTube. Okay.
This reminds me when you're on YouTube and you got those random recommended videos for West County of Texas's high school
Yeah, I just
daily meeting.
realized.
It's like, why are you
We're
doing
technically in period era.
Yeah, it's like you're telling him which country to invade.
that? Go to roleplay right now.
No.
We don't have time.
Wait, actually, no, say that.
No, we
I
don't
want
have
to
time.
I want to take
No,
a picture.
we
For
don't.
yearbook, for yearbook.
Later.
Wait.
Oh my god, but I
You
like
don't
the
have
way you
time.
think.
Mm-hmm.
We have more important business.
Oh my god.
So this week, of course, we're doing a history of gunpowder weapons.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Mostly everyone who voted is absent.
Except for me.
Yeah. So, this image of gunpowder introduction. Oh, does anyone know anything about gunpowder actually?
It goes boom.
Okay.
It comes from creepers.
It's
No.
made of a nitrogen substance. I don't remember the exact chemical composition.
Very good, very good.
But
Anything else?
no.
For guns, they used to have to stuff it into their guns, like musket style. Sorry, that was very weird. Joker. But now it's in bullets.
If you held it, if gun too close to your face, it would burn you, right?
My grandpa had a musket.
All right. So first there would be the distinction between gunpowder and black powder. Gunpowder, or more accurately, smokeless powder, is what's used to describe modern gunpowder. That is more efficient and far more powerful. And black powder is a new name of older gunpowder used in muskets.
So when you look at old documentaries, and they're talking about the Civil War, and they're reenact it, there's dust everywhere, like that kind of powder.
So this is the makeup, the three main elements of gunpowder: potassium nitrate, sulfur, and carbon. You got potassium nitrate part. So the sulfur and carbon act as the fuel for the gunpowder. It's what actually uses to
Ignite.
yeah. Potassium nitrate is the oxygen supply because it's an element of potassium in the form of K, and nitrate with N, and then three oxygens are attached to make one of these elements. So when the reaction is sparked, the potassium and the nitrate break off from the oxygen, and the oxygen supplies the oxygen for the combustion to actually occur. Now it's also what's called a low explosive powder, which is very technical. But moving on, let's go to the earliest forms of gunpowder weapons. It was part of the four great inventions of ancient China. It was originally discovered in China. The other three inventions was paper, printing press, and the compass. And then gunpowder was the other great invention from China. It had a very vast, the knowledge of it spread very rapidly. When the earliest known formula, around the year 1044, roughly around that time, and in later centuries, like 1100s and 1200s, did gunpowder and the form of gunpowder weapons and cannons spread across Europe and the Middle East. At around the same time, the Chinese had actually developed these things. The earliest military uses were with fire weapons and bombs, things like fire arrows or fire lances, and then also just bombs.
Didn't we watch a whole video a couple years ago about how fire arrows wouldn't have really worked?
Yeah, it's a little different. It does use the chemical form of fires, which we'll get into later. But the earliest known gunpowder was found in the 1st century. It's a lot of Chinese alchemists were in the search of what they call the elixir of life. as a form of medicine, which they found it would combust and combust into fire. They didn't have the mixture of potassium nitrate enough for it to actually explode, but it just became really, really flammable. So it wasn't quite exploding yet, but it's just very fiery, which is why they called it fire medicine.
Wait, so what was the other stuff?
What do you mean?
That was earlier, that found earlier in this.
That is this.
But that's the first.
This is the first.
Sorry, my brain wasn't working right.
Think from year 0 to year 100. That's the first century.
Okay. Well, because the other ones have 1044,
Well, yeah, that was the first formula of proper gunpowder.
but they didn't make it till 1,000 years later.
Well, they've been making it, but it's well, like they knew it, but there's no surviving documents from that time of an actual formula for creating it.
But there's the one from earlier.
That's from the year 1000. This is the year like 100.
Oh.
That's 900 years later.
Sorry, I always get confused with the BC and the other thing. I always get confused, so I thought that was like earlier.
No, that one was like 900 years later.
Okay, now I get it. Thank you.
So yeah, and so it just became common practice to use these. And the military saw some use in this with some early gunpowder weapons. First would be fire arrows, where you notice that we have this little cartridge attached to the arrow with a fuse. So you shoot the arrow, and then this would kind of combust into flames after the fuse went to it. Again, this used about 50% potassium nitrate rather than in black powder 75%. So again, this wouldn't explode, this would just burst into flames rapidly. And so this is how they actually were able to get fire arrows on like mini invasion. So they couldn't. And so it would just be this chemical reaction that bursts into flames after it landed or while it's in the air. Next was also the fire lance. This one is also really important as the actual predecessor to guns or handheld firearms, and also with explosives and bombs. So moving into the fire lance, here's a depiction of the fire lance, which is the predecessor of firearms. And essentially, how it worked, it was more of like a shock weapon where you have this big lance like an actual spear, and you have this fuse at the end that would just have this power or a fire that comes out in a kind of explosion, and that you would light it before you charge, and so it acts as a shock to when you actually get stuck in with whatever enemy you're fighting. Later they added debris like rocks and also a metal barrel to have a much more powerful explosion and also have more of a devastating effect with the debris that came out of the fire lance. Later the spearhead was also removed, and solely now it was just a stick with a big boom thing in the front to
Stick with the big boom thing.
yeah. So they'll more rely on the actual fire part of the lance and just remove the spearhead. And also came with bombs. Here is what is called exploding pottery. These
I
are
guess those didn't explode.
huh?
I guess those ones didn't explode.
Or just not used.
They weren't used. Essentially, it's pottery. Okay, you make pots. It's hollowed out, and then you make these caltrop designs. But that's what they have with these spikes, which is very similar to the principle of the Mark II, but it's the American pineapple grenade, the famous one used in World War II. It has those grooves. And the principle is when it explodes from the inside, well, you fill this with gunpowder and light it, and that's the explosion. The thinner pieces would break apart, and then these thicker pieces, the spikes, would actually fly out as whole chunks, and that'd be more devastating than just pieces of flat pottery, which is the same principle as the pineapple grenade.
Eat shrapnel.
Yeah. So they're used as either hand grenades and also naval bombs. So if you're in naval games, if you got close enough, you could chuck some of these naval bombs at other ships to cause a devastating effect. They're generally made of ceramic, which is like this, and they're later used with iron, or called iron bombs. The Japanese, interestingly, called them stoneware bombs. Moving into the origins of cannons and other artillery, which is the derivative of the fire lance. Here, this hand cannon, it's called the Wu-Wei bronze cannon. You have it in your hand, and you could just light it and.
That's so sick. You just run around with a cannon?
Yeah, a hand cannon.
That's so sick. I'm sorry.
The kickback though.
Yeah. Cannons in Europe also came up around the same time, which is around 1200 to 1300, was when this was in use, and so knowledge spread. Also in the Middle East, all these sorts of cannons and gunpowder and artillery came up around the same time. And the cannons, when we went to like early cannons, right? This is hello. We have.
Missed the hand for
We're talking like medieval Europe. There were a lot of really small caliber cannons that would fire pellets, but then also very large caliber cannons similar to this, which began the early modern period of gunpowder weapons, or just weapons in general. But most of these cannons were used in siege warfare. Most of these cannons would just fire big, massive steel balls or boulders. And so these were used to knock down siege walls, to create an entry rather than do what's called an escalade attack, where you climb over the walls with, say, ladders or siege towers. Now here's some other interesting artillery. Here's the Rebelliquin, which is this array of like cannons. Another one is called the Hawacha, or the photos will come up later, and then the puckle gun. So here's the Hawacha, which is essentially rocket arrows. You just light it, you light them all, and then all these arrows just like, with rockets go off, and it's just like a hail of arrows in an instant.
Fun fact, Mythbusters actually tested if they would be viable to use it in battle, and yes, it would be somewhat viable.
Yeah. The data in which they were used,
How
I
did they
heard,
test that?
they
They
just
made one.
And they were like, they just got a bunch of people to stand in a field, they saw
No, they used,
dummies.
dummies.
Although I heard the actual date in which they were used is contended, because the earlier dates that I'm not sure exactly when, but the dates where people say they were used at this time earlier than most people think, people contend that, saying that rockets weren't viable at that time. They hadn't developed rockets yet, but that's a whole other thing. Here's the puckle gun. Not really used very well if you imagine like a maybe Gatling gun. It shoots like this with the rotating cylinder that you put the shots in. Wasn't really used all that much. So moving into actual firearms, with arquebuses and muskets, so howitzers. So arquebuses are believed to have originated from the Ottoman Empire, and with these firearms came the rise of what scholars now call gunpowder empires formed on gunpowder weapons and tactics. Also the shifting use of cannons against infantry as well, around 1617 and 1800s. They started to slowly shift. So moving into arquebuses and muskets, there's a little difference between the terminology. Historically, they've been used interchangeably. Here's what we now call a musket, and also back here is a proper arquebus.
So it doesn't have the spike on the end?
Well, no, that doesn't come with that's not something that differentiates them.
You good?
You good?
The one differing factor is that in arquebus you put in a piece of like string or rope and you light it, and then that's how it shoots. Whereas with a musket, you have a flintlock mechanism where you have a piece of flint held together by, I think it was called the cock, and you have this tray of gunpowder that strikes against and creates the reaction on the outside that goes into the inside.
That sounds a lot more efficient than having to light a string every time.
Yeah. The arquebuses came before the musket, although essentially they were actually invented around the same time. But muskets were very long, and arquebuses tended to be shorter. So sometimes muskets were called, I think, double arquebuses. And for many hundreds of years, when they were invented, I think it was on the 1400s, arquebuses were more commonly used and more preferred. But as the 1600s and 1700s came around, people started to use muskets more. But generally, arquebuses were used more before muskets. And also came the use of line infantry tactics. When it was the time of the arquebuses was what was called the pike and shot era, where mostly soldiers with pikes and also arquebuses were used in warfare. And when the muskets came in and the advancements with cannons, line infantry tactics were more commonly used. which part of the reason, the cannons was the main reason why the pike and shot era ended, because pikes are only effective in large groups. So when there were cannons, there was tactics where you would just shoot the cannons straight through the pike blocks and destroy like a majority of them, killing all the people with this big massive ball. And so people moved away into more line infantry tactics where you get a lot of people with muskets, because as Julie noted, it takes a long time to load, and these are muzzle loading rifles, so you have to actually put the bullet in with the gunpowder and you have to stuff it down, and then that's when you can shoot. Later in the 1800s, early 1800s, the Germans, I believe, made the first breech loading rifles, where you can actually load bullets from the back, from here instead of from the front, which made them much quicker and more effective to use for the individual soldier. Moving into cannons, howitzers, and mortars, they are very distinct. Cannons have what's been used for the majority of history from 1200s up until like 1800s, 1900s. Since then, cannons haven't really been used. But the defining thing of cannons is that they have a more flat trajectory. When you shoot a cannon, let's say this is a cannon. Excuse my drawing. This is the cannon. It will generally shoot very flat trajectories, very fast, in order for when their siege purposes, when their purpose of sieges, they're meant to try and break down the walls, so they have to take a very direct approach.
What if you tilted it up though?
It's a more hyperbolic trajectory.
Yeah, well, that's what howitzers are.
So is a howitzer just differently
It's
how
just,
you position it?
it's not how you position it, it's just specially made to fire at these angles. So now we have a howitzer, right? So this is a howitzer, and it would fire now in an arc.
When
Like
were
this.
those invented?
Those were invented around the 1700s.
Why are they called howitzers?
I'm not sure actually, but
Because some person with the last name Howitzer.
John Howitzer. I don't know, but so that's the basis of howitzers. Then you can arc shots over siege walls. This also was the beginning of explosive shells, not just solid shells. And then lastly here, the distinction of mortars, which are more flat on the ground and fire from 45 degrees to 90 degrees, so you get an arc.
Those seem like the best overall because they can do both the cannon and the howitzer.
No, they're all specifically made for each type of scenario.
But that looks like it goes this way and that way.
Which one?
This one.
Yeah, I mean those actually were invented and then it fell out of favor almost immediately because it's just hard to find a suitable use for it, especially in line infantry tactic warfare.
But can't they do both? Like can't they angle pretty much?
Well, this one's like a set piece, and the barrel is just pointed straight up, and it just goes like this. The howitzers is what found to be the most versatility, because no one really found the need to fire really high up and then down.
But it can go from 45 to 90, so it can move around.
Yeah, a little bit, but people still the armies still prefer the howitzers.
Fair enough.
Because you can still also kind of use it like a cannon, but also use it to bombard troops from a farther distance. Mortars wouldn't see use until World War I when they were scaled down much farther to where a single person can carry it and then rapidly move around. Whereas heavy duty mortars are just really cumbersome. But yeah. Also distinction of, you ever seen this terminology 12-pounder?
I'm assuming that means it shoots something that's 12 pounds.
Very good. That's what it means. It shoots a shell that's 12 pounds.
Pretty heavy for a little thing like that.
If I ordered a quarter pounder from McDonald's, I'm shooting a quarter pound hamburger. into
You
my
would
mouth.
need 48 of those.
Unless you're ordering a quarter-pounder cannon.
That's him.
You would need 40.
That's more like a medieval cannon, like a little tiny ball.
Gosh.
The bang gun.
It's like a-
Yeah. So moving to modern rifles and artillery, there was a large advancement in use and precision, of course, as technology had improved. A lot of the mechanisms became more accurate, and also we started to really document exactly like at what angle and how far each shell goes. Like in World War I, you'd have these timetables. Well, they're not really for time. They say like at this distance, you shoot at this angle and it goes this far, and then at this distance you do this. So like
So they learned physics.
almost, but it's very rudimentary because they got this. They got all this data on like a clear spring day in the middle of nowhere where nothing's happening, and it's just with little wind sometimes, and so it doesn't reflect the actual battlefield conditions for every piece of artillery because maybe the ground, maybe there's an angle to the ground, maybe there's some displacement, maybe there's a lot of wind that really affects the trajectory of the artillery shells. Also came with more dynamic rolls, both for rifles and artillery. The rifles became to specialize in specific things like anti-tank rifles or just regular rifles, assault rifles, shotguns also. Even for artillery, some going into anti-tank guns or anti-air guns as well as more of a decentralization of warfare. Because if we look at, so if we go back to line infantry tactics, the whole point is just to have a large centralized block. Let's say this is like 150 people, all with muskets, so that they can put down a hail of fire against another group of line infantry. But now with artillery and rifles, the effectiveness of a single soldier goes up drastically, and so a single soldier could, with an assault rifle, take out far more people than a soldier with a musket can. And so then the units of the military broke down to smaller pieces into squads rather than big blocks of line infantry, and all that. Moving into developments of rifles and modern firearms, the biggest thing of what defines a rifle is what's called rifling. Does anyone know what rifling is?
Yes. Rifling is a special thing inside of the gun barrel that goes the entire length that spins the bullet so it keeps a more or less straight trajectory.
Yeah, exactly.
That was like when I can't find something in my purse.
So like muskets traditionally are what called smoothbore, where you just have this barrel, right? Say this is a barrel, and you have this musket ball, right? And it just gets pushed straight through. Has anyone ever seen what happens when you throw or kick like a knuckleball?
A what?
A knuckleball.
I don't know.
Anyone know what a knuckleball is? What happens when you kick a knuckleball?
It's like when the ball just goes everywhere, but in like a straight line.
And why is that?
I actually have no idea. It's like
Okay. So if you take a ball, let's say, if you throw a ball like with spin, right? Like let's take baseball. Everyone knows a curveball. And you throw a ball with spin, it curves the air that goes around it. Therefore,
Gives a directional-ish
right.
turn.
Or has anyone ever heard of the Magnus effect?
Yes! I knew you were gonna say that.
So given the Magnus effect, it's essentially if you drop a ball straight down and you spin it this way,
It'll go to, from our point of view, to the left.
yeah. So if you were to drop a ball spinning this way, and the air is coming down, the grooves of the ball will push the air around it.
My bad, other way, it goes right, from our point of view.
Oh, it does go this way. Right, so if there's air here, it gets pushed up this way, and the air here gets pushed under it. And kind of the air goes in a circle, but it creates this space in the air where the ball will move forward. So search up the Magnus effect, and it's quite very interesting. But when you shoot a smoothbore musket ball, there's no spin on it. It's just this ball going straight through the air. And depending on maybe the wind conditions, if there's just higher pressure air in this area, or this area, right? Like if we have a musket ball going this way, and there's a lot of air going this way, but not that much here, the ball's gonna get pushed this way, off top.
Curveballs.
Because it's smoothbore, and it's just a ball flying through. But as Moises pointed out to us, a rifled gun has these grooves. That'll kind of look like this if you do a cutaway. But just imagine these grooves that curve around.
It's like a spring sort of.
A
Like
spiral.
not look like not a spring, but like that's
It's
right.
like
Yeah,
a spiral.
So as the bullet goes through, the bullet is spun around like this, which will cut through the air more. And even developments of bullets where they have these pointed edges, I guess like this, right? So that spinning, it becomes very aerodynamic and it's not as affected by the wind anymore. And that's a distinction, and that's why there are guns called rifles, because these are guns that have rifling. Whereas distinctly muskets, or smoothbore muskets. There's also rifled muskets, which those are also called rifles, but smoothbore muskets do not have them, and that's the distinction. Yeah, Moises.
Fun fact, I think battleships, tanks, and just things that shoot projectiles like that, they all have rifling.
Yeah, most things that shoot have rifling. So that's a
But
minor.
not all of them are called rifles anymore. It's just-
Just to name it, so.
Yeah, it's rifles you'll hear mostly pertain to small arms, like things a person can hold. It's like this is a rifle. Everyone also has assault rifles. Same idea. Pistols also have rifling, but I think there's distinctions between those kinds of guns. Also, bullet designs we talked about. Instead of balls, it's more pointed. Also, not only for aerodynamics, but for better piercing. If you think back in even as late as World War II, or even like Korean War, there wasn't much armor. Armor had dropped off when gunpowder weapons came into question. Right, in medieval era, you think people had a suit of armor of steel that could, or even chainmail that can block a sword. But once gunpowder weapons have come into effect, no one really wore that much armor anymore.
More like Kevlar or something.
Yeah, they didn't invent Kevlar yet. Although that was also part of the reason why muskets were not preferred, because although muskets are much bigger and can pierce armor better, there was no need because there was no armor. So they used arquebuses because it was easier. But now with the rise of Kevlar and this kind of modern body armor, a bullet design would be needed to penetrate that body armor. Also, the development of smokeless powder, it's more powerful and also doesn't produce as much smoke, which is good for, like, let's say artillery or tanks. Because if you're a tank and you shoot your shot and it's, let's say it's not smokeless powder, then suddenly you have all this smoke in front of you and you can't see. This is also a development of the muzzle brake. Those became more powerful. So modern artillery, again, precise distances. After World War I, they got more precise distances with more modernized equipment. Also modernized tactics. It also was so precise with these modern tactics that you could have forward observers, and they could radio you positions of enemies, and you could shoot them without even having to see them for miles away. Also, taking a more anti-infantry focus, no one really builds castles or forts anymore, so there's no need to knock down walls. So artillery has taken a role of more combating other infantry or tanks, or maybe other buildings and trenches, rather than in use for sieges, especially because sieges don't happen anymore. Yeah, that's most of it. I'm gonna take this off, it's pretty hot.
Yeah.
I know, you're wearing like 4 layers.
Also, nice combat gear.
I know.
Thank you.
Good costume. S tier costume this time.
Alright, so we got odd number of people, this is good.
This is good.
I'm gonna rig the vote.
Can I vote?
It was a rigged
Yeah.
Wait, I'm
election.
on vote.
I
Yeah.
will rig it again.
Okay,
Who are you?
Trump. Alright,
Did you not get the cue?
everyone raise your hands if you want to study. Next week, do
Oh, wait.
history.
Before we do it, can you define what ballistics is?
It's the study of the trajectory of objects.
Ooh, David's
So,
class 2.0.
You guys are taking physics. If you essentially how launching an object, it's gonna be a more scientifically focused thing, but the science of how the trajectory of things that are launched.
Hi, Holly. We're voting.
So that's essentially how it ties into artillery and history.
It's okay.
So that's ballistics. Essentially. Any other questions people have? This might pertain to this.
Ooh,
No? Alright.
interesting.
Everyone raise your hands for history of ballistics. raise your hands for history of animation. We got 1, 2, 3, 4.
I wanna see
Is that a fifth hand?
Steamboat
Thinking
Willie.
about it. I mean,
Oh
Mickey.
my, that's some racist nonsense.
All right.
Steamboat
And-
Willie.
Oh, yeah.
No, you want to do Sterling Engine or no?
I don't really appreciate
Well, you couldn't get it to next week.
Okay, sure.
No, do your duty.
Alright.
We're doing history of animation.
Push your chairs all the way in, please, thank you.
Thank you guys.
Thank you,
Is
Maggie.
this the chair that's like funny against the wall?
That's
Holly.